I wanted to read a story by H.P. Lovecraft. Hopefully, we are not interrupted, and hopefully, everything goes smoothly. Right, okay. Let me begin. This story is another one of H.P. Lovecraft, which I've read summaries before. This one will be the entire story. And once again, it is horror and suspense. Well, alrighty. Let us get started. So, it begins. You needn't think I'm crazy, Elliot. Plenty of others have queerer prejudices than this. Why don't you laugh at Oliver's grandfather, who won't ride in a motor? If I don't like that damn subway, it's my own business. And we got here more quickly anyhow in the taxi. We'd have to walk up here, up the hill from Park Street, if we'd taken the car. I know I'm more nervous than I was when you saw me last year, but you don't need to hold a clinic over it. There's plenty of reason, God knows, and I fancy I'm lucky to be sane at all. Why the third degree? You didn't used to be so inquisitive. Well, if you must hear it, I don't know why you shouldn't. Maybe you ought to. Anyhow, for you kept me writing like a grieved parent when you heard I've begun to cut the art club and keep away from Pickman. Now that he's disappeared, I go around the club once in a while, but my nerves aren't what they were. No, I don't know what's become of Pickman. I don't like to guess. You might have surmised that I had some inside information when I dropped him, and that's why I don't want to think where he's gone. Let the police find what they can. It won't be much, judging from the fact that they don't know yet of the old North End place he hired under the name of Peters. I'm not sure I could find it again myself. Not that I'd ever try, even in broad daylight. Yes, I do know, or I'm afraid I know why he maintained it. I'm coming to that, and I think you'll understand before I'm through why I don't tell the police. They knew they would ask me to guide them, but I couldn't go back there, even if I knew that way. There was something there, and now I can't use the subway. And you may as well have your laugh at this too. I can't go down the cellars anymore. I think you should have known. I didn't drop Pickman for the same silly reasons that old fuzzy woman, Dr. Reed, or Joe Minot, or Boswell did. Morbid art doesn't shock me. And when a man has genius, the genius Pickman had, I feel an honor to know him, no matter what direction his work takes. Boston never had a greater painter than Richard Upton Pickman. I said it at first, and I say it still. I never swerved an inch, either when he showed that ghoul feeding that you remember, when Minute cut him. You know it takes profound art and profound insight into nature to turn out stuff like Pickman's. Any magazine cover Mac can splash paint around wildly and call it a nightmare or a witch's sabbath or a portrait of the devil. But only a great painter can make such a thing really scare or ring true. That's because only a real artist knows the actual anatomy of the terrible, or the physiology of fear, the exact sort of lines and proportions that connect with the latent instincts of, or hereditary memories of fright, and the proper color, contrast, and lighting effects to stir up dormant senses of strangers. I don't have to tell you why a fusilli really brings a shiver, while a cheap ghost story front piece merely makes us laugh. There's something those fellows catch beyond life that they're able to make us catch for a second. Dore had it, Sime had it, and Girl Love Chicago has it. And Pickman had it as no man ever had it before, or I hope to heaven ever will again. Don't ask me what it is they see. You know, in ordinary art, there's all difference in the world between vital, breathing things drawn from nature, or models, and the artificial truck that commercial small fry reel off in a bare studio by rule. Well, I should say that really weird artist has a kind of vision which makes models or summons up what amounts to actual scenes from the spectral world he lives in. Anyhow, he manages to turn out results that differ from the pretenders' mince pies dreams in just about the same way that a life painter results differ from the concoctions of a correspondence school cartoonist. If I had ever seen what Pickman saw, but no, here, let us have a drink before we get any deeper. God, I wouldn't be alive if I'd ever seen what that man, if he was a man, saw. You recall that Pickman's forte was faces. I don't believe anyone since Goya could put so much of sheer hell into a set of features or twist of expression. And before Goya, you have to go back to the medieval chaps who did the gargoyles and the chimeras on Notre Dame and the Mont Saint Michael. They believed all sorts of things. Maybe they saw all sorts of things too, for the Middle Ages had some curious faces. I remember you asking Pickman yourself, the year before you went away, wherever in the thunder he got such ideas and visions. Wasn't that a nasty laugh he gave you? It was partly because of that laugh that redropped him. Reed, had just taken up comparative pathology and was full of pompous inside stuff about the biological or evolutionary significance of this or that mental or physical symptom. He said Pickman repelled him more and more every day and almost frightened him toward the last, that the fellow's features and expressions were more slowly developing in a way he didn't like, in a way that wasn't human. He had a lot of talk about diet, and said that Pickman must be abnormal or eccentric to the last degree. I suppose you told Reed. And if you and he had any correspondence over it, that he'd let Pickman's painting get on his nerves or harrow up his imagination. I know I told them that myself then. But keep in mind that I didn't drop Pickman for anything like this. On the contrary, my admiration for him kept him growing, for that ghoul feeding was a tremendous achievement. As you know, the club wouldn't exhibit it, and the Museum of Fine Arts wouldn't accept it as a gift. And I can add that nobody would buy it, so Pickman had the right in his house till he went. Now his father has it in Salem. Pickman comes out of old Salem stock and had a witch ancestor hanged in 1692. I got into the habit of calling on Pickman quite often, especially after I began making notes for a monograph on weird art. Probably it was his work which put the idea into my head, and anyhow, I found him a mine of data and suggestions when I came to develop it. He showed me all the paintings and drawings he had about it, including some pen and ink sketches that would, I very believe, have gotten him kicked out of the club if the members had seen them. Before long, I was pretty nearly a devotee and would listen for hours like a schoolboy to art theories and philosophical speculations wild enough to qualify him for the Danvers Asylum. My hero worship, coupled by the fact that people generally were commencing to have less and less to do with him, it made him get very confidential with me. And one evening he hinted if I were fairly close-mouthed and none too squeamish, he might show me something rather unusual, something a bit stronger than anything he had in the house. He said, there are things that won't do for Newberry Street. Things that are out of place here, and that cannot be conceived here. Anyhow, it's my business to catch the overtones of the soul. You won't find those in a parvenu set of artificial streets on made land. Back Bay is in Boston. It isn't anything yet, because it's had no time to pick up memories and attract local spirits. If there were any ghouls here, they're the tame ghouls of the salt marsh and a shallow cove. I want human ghosts. the ghost of beings highly organized enough to look on hell and know the meaning of what they saw. The place for an artist to live is on the north end of any ascetite were sincere. He'd put up with the slums for the sake of the mass traditions. God, man, don't you realize that places like that weren't merely made but actually grew? Generation after generation lived and felt and died there, and in the days when people weren't afraid to live and feel and die. Don't you know, there was a mill on Cobb's Hill in 1632, and that half of the present streets were laid out by 1650. I can show you houses that have stood 2 centuries and a half and more. Houses that have witnessed what would make modern homes crumble into powder. What do moderners know of life and the forces behind it? You call the Salem witchcraft a delusion, but how wage my 4 times great-grandmother could have told you these things. They hanged her on Gallows Hill, with Cotton Mather looking sanctimoniously on her. Mather, damn him, was afraid that somebody might succeed in kicking free of the accursed cage of monotony. I wish someone had laid a spell on him or sucked his blood in the night. I can show you a house he lived in. I can show you another one he was afraid to enter in spite of all the fine, bold talk. He knew things he didn't dare put into that stupid Magnalia or the puerile wonders of the invisible world. Look here. Didn't you know the entire whole north end once had a set of tunnels that kept certain people in touch with other people's houses and the burial ground and the sea? Let them persecute and persecute above ground. Things went on every day that they couldn't reach, and the voices laughed at night they couldn't place. Why, man, out of 10 surviving houses built before 1700 and not moved since, I'll wager that in 8 I can show you something queer in the cellar. There's hardly a month that you don't read of a workman finding bricked up arches and wells leading to nowhere in this or that old place as it comes down. You can see one from Henchman Street from the elevated last year. There were witches and their spells summoned, and pirates and what they brought from the sea, and smugglers and privateers, and I will tell you, people knew how to live, how to enlarge the bounds of life in the old times. This wasn't only a world of a bold and wise man. They could only know and think of today in contrast with such pale pink brains that even a club of supposed artists gets shuddered in convulsions of a picture goes beyond the feelings of the Beacon Street tea table. The only saving grace of the present is that it's too damn stupid to question the past very closely. What do maps and records and guidebooks really tell you of the North End? At a guess, I'll guarantee to lead you to 30 or 40 alleyways, networks of the alleys north of Prince Street that aren't suspected by 10 living beings outside of foreigners that swarm them. And what do those dagos know of meaning? No thumber. These ancient places are dreaming, gorgeously overflowing with wonder and terror, and escapes from the commonplace. Yet there's not a living soul to understand or profit by them. Or rather, that's the only soul, for I haven't been digging around in the past for nothing. See here, you're interested in the sort of thing. What if I told you that I've got another studio up there, where I can catch the night spirit antique horror and paint the things that I couldn't even think of on Newberry Street? Naturally, I don't tell those accursed old maids at the club with Reed, damn him, whispering even as it is. I'm a sort of monster bound down by the toboggan of reversed evolution. Yes, Thumber, I decided long ago that one must paint terror as well as beauty from life. So I did some exploring in places where I had reason to find where terror lives. I've got a place that I don't believe 3 living Nordic men besides myself have ever seen. It isn't very far from the elevated as the distance goes, but it's centuries away as the soul goes. I took it because of the queer old brick well in the cellar. One of the sort I told you about. That shack's almost tumbling down so that nobody would live there. But I hate to tell you how little I pay for it. The windows are boarded up, but I like that all the better since I don't want daylight for what I do. I paint in the cellar, where the inspiration is thickest. But in the other rooms, I've furnished the ground floor. A Sicilian owns it, and I've hired it under the name of Peters. Now, if you're game, I'll take you there tonight. I think you'll enjoy the pictures, for as I said, I let myself go a bit there. It's no vast tour. Sometimes I do it on foot, for I don't want to attract attention with a taxi in such a place. We can take the shuttle on the south station of Battery Street, and after that, the walk isn't very much. Well, Elliot, there wasn't much for me to do after that hankering, but to keep myself from running instead of walking. For the first vacant cab we could see, we changed to the elevated at the south station, and about 12 o'clock I had climbed down there, the steps of Battery Street, and we stuck against the old waterfall past Constitution Wharf. I didn't keep track of the cross streets, but I can't tell you yet which it was that we turned up on. I didn't know it was Green Snow Lane. When we did turn, it was a climb through the deserted length of the oldest and dirtiest alley I've ever seen, with crumbling looking gables, broken small paned windows, and archaic chimneys that stood out, half disintegrated against a moonlit sky. I don't believe there were 3 houses in sight that haven't been standing in Cotton Mather's time. Certainly, I glimpsed at least 2 with overhang, and once I thought I saw a peaked roofline of almost the forgotten pre-Gambrel type, though antiquarians tell us that there are none left in Boston. From that alley, which had dim light, we turned to the left into an equally silent and still narrower alley with no light at all. And a minute made what I think was an obtuse angled bend towards the right in the dark. Not long after this, Pickman produced a flashlight and revealed an antediluvian 10-paneled door that looked damnably worm-eaten. Unlocking it, he ushered me into a barren hallway with what once splendid dark oak paneling. Simple, of course it was, but thrillingly suggestive at the times of androgen vibes and witchcraft. And he took me through a door on the left, lit an oil lamp, and told me to make myself at home. Now, Elliot, I'm what the man in the street would call fairly hard-boiled, but I'll confess that what I see on these walls of that room gave me a bad turn. They were pictures, you know? The ones he couldn't paint or even show in Newberry. And he was right when he said he had to let himself go. Here, have another drink. I need one, anyhow. There's no use in trying to tell you what they were like, because the awful, the blasphemous horror, the unbelievable loathsomeness and moral fetor came from simple touches quite beyond the power of words to classify. There were none of the exotic techniques you see in Sydney Sime or Trans-Saturn landscapes or lunar fungi of Clark Ashton Smith that he used to freeze blood. The backgrounds were mostly old churchyards, deep woods, cliffs by the sea, brick tunnels, ancient paneled rooms, or simple vaults of masonry. Copp's Hill burying ground, which could not be made blocks away from this very house, was a favorite scene. The madness and monstrosity lay in the figures of the foreground, for Pickman's morbid art was preeminently one of demonic portraiture. These figures were seldom completely human, but often approached humanly in a varying degree. Most of the bodies, while roughly bipedal, had a forward, slumping, and vaguely canine cast. The texture of the majority of these was a kind of unpleasant rubberiness. I could see them now. Their occupations, well, don't ask me to be too precise. They were usually feeding. I won't say on what. They were sometimes shown in groups in cemeteries or underground passages, and often appeared to be in a battle over their prey, or rather, their treasure trove. And what damnable expressiveness Pickman sometimes gave these lightless faces of this camel body. Occasionally, the things were shown leaping through open windows at night, or swatting on the chest of sleepers, worrying at their throats. One canvas showed a ring of them baying around a hanged witch on Gallows Hill, whose dead face held a close kinship to theirs. But don't get the idea that it was all this hideous business of theme and setting which struck me faint. I'm not a 3-year-old kid, and I'd seen much like this before, was the faces, Elliot. Those accursed faces that leaned and leered and slavered out of the canvas with the very breath of life. By God, man, I verily believe that they were alive. That nauseous wizard had walked into the fires of hell in pigment, and with its brush had been a nightmare spawning wand. Give me the decanter, Elliot. There was one thing called the lesson. Heaven pity me that I ever saw it. Listen, can you fancy a swatting circle of a nameless dog-like things in a churchyard teaching a small child how to feed themselves? The price of a changeling, I suppose. You know the old myth about how the weird people leave their spawn in cradles in exchange for human babies they steal. Pickman was showing what happens to those stolen babies, how they grow up. And then I began to see a hideous relationship in the faces of the human and non-human figures. He was in all graduations of morbidity and between the frankly non-human and degradedly human, establishing a sardonic linkage in evolution. The dog-like things were developing from mortals. And no sooner had I wondered what he made of their own young as left with mankind in form of changelings, then my eye caught a picture embodying the very thought. It was that of an ancient Puritan interior, a heavily beamed room with lattice windows, a settle, and clumsy 17th century furniture, with the family sitting about while the father read from the scriptures. Every face but one showed nobility and reverence, but that one reflected the mockery of the pit. It was that of a young man in years, and no doubt belonged to a supposed son of the pious father, but in essence, it was the kin of the unclean things. It was their changeling, and it was a spirit of supreme irony. Pickman had given the features a very perceptible resemblance to his own. By this time, Pickman had lighted a lamp in the adjoining room and was politely holding open the door for me, asking me if I would care to see his modern studies. I hadn't been able to give him much of my opinions. I was too speechless with fright and loathing, but I think he finally fully understood and felt highly complimented. And now, I want to assure you again, Elliot, I am no motley coddle to scream at anything which shows a bit of a departure from the usual. I'm middle-aged and decently sophisticated. I guess you saw enough of me in France to know I'm not easily knocked out. Remember, too, that I'd just about recovered my wind and gotten used to these frightening pictures, which turned colonial New England into some kind of annex into hell. Well, in spite of all this, that next room forced a real scream out of me. I had to clutch at the doorway to keep from kneeling over. The other chamber had shown a pack of ghouls and witches overrunning the world of our forefathers. But this one brought the horror right into my own daily life. God, how could that man paint? There was a study called Subway Accident, in which a flock of the vile things were clambering up from some unknown catacomb through a crack on the floor of the Boylston Street subway and attacking a crowd of people on the platform. Another showed a dance on Copp's Hill among tombs with the background of today. Then there were any number of cellar views with monsters creeping through the holes and rifts in the masonry and grinning as they swatted behind barrels or furnaces and waited for their first victim to descend the stairs. One disgusting canvas seemed to depict a vast cross-section of Beacon Hill with ant-like armies of mephitic monsters squeezing themselves through barrels that honeycombed the ground. Dancing and modern cemeteries were freely pictured, and another conception somehow shocked me more than all the rest. A scene in an unknown vault where scores of the beast crowded about one who held a well-known Boston guidebook was evidently reading out loud. All were pointing to a certain passage, and every face seemed so distorted with epileptic and reverberant laughter that I almost thought I heard the fiendish echoes. The title of the picture was Holmes, Lowell, and Longfellow Lie Buried in Mount Auburn. As I gradually steadied myself, I began and got readjusted to the second floor of devilry, and morbidly I began to analyze some of the points in my sickening loathing. In the first place, I said to myself, these things repelled because of the utter inhumanity and callous cruelty they showed in Pickman. The fellow must be a relentless enemy of all mankind to take such glee in the torture of the brain and flesh and degradation of the moral and mortal tenement. In the second place, they were terrified because of their very greatness, their art, that convinced when we saw the pictures, we saw the demons themselves and were afraid of them. And the queer part was that Pickman got none of his power from the use of selectiveness or bizarre. Nothing was blurred, distorted, or conventionalized. Outlines were sharp and lifelike. These details were almost painfully defined. And the faces. It was not any mere artist's interpretation that we saw. It was pandemonium itself, a crystal clear and stark objectivity. That's what it was. By heaven, the man was not a fantasite or romanticist at all. He did not even try to give us the churning, prismatic informer of dreams, but coldly and sardonically reflected some stable, mechanistic, and well-established horror world which he fully saw, brilliantly, squarely, and unfaltering. God knows what that world could have been, were he ever glimpsed the blasphemous shapes that looped and trotted and crawled through it. But whatever the baffling sound, the source of these images, one thing was plain. Pickman was in every sense, in conception and execution, a thorough and painstakingly, almost scientific realist. My host was now leading the way down the cellar to his actual studio. I braced myself for some hellish effects among the unfinished canvases. As we reached the bottom of the damp stairs, he turned his flashlight to a corner of the large open space at hand, revealing the circular brick curb of what was evidently a great well and the earthen floor. When we walked nearer, I saw that it must have been 5 feet across, with walls a good foot thick and some 6 inches above the ground. Solid work of the 17th century, or I was much mistaken. That Pickman said was the kind of thing he had been talking about, an aperture of network of tunnels that used to undermine the hill. I noticed idly that I did not seem to be bricked up, and that the heavy disc of wood formed an apparent cover. Thinking of these things, must have been connected, if Pinkman's wild hints had not been mere rhetoric. I shivered slightly, then turned to follow him up a step and through a narrow door into a room of fair size, provided with a wooden floor, furnished as a studio. An acetylene gas outfit gave the light necessary for the work. The unfinished pictures on the easels or propped against walls were as ghastly as the ones upstairs, and showed the painstakingly methods of the artist. Scenes were blocked out with extreme care, and penciled guides lines told of the minute exactitude which Pickman used to get in the right perspective and proportions. The man was great. I say it even now, knowing as much as I do. A large camera on a table excited my notice, and Pickman told me that he used it in taking scenes for backgrounds, so that he might paint them for photographs in the studio instead of carting his outfit around town for this or that view. He thought a photograph quite as good as an actual scene or a model sustained work, and declared him employed them regularly. There was something very disturbing about the nauseous sketches and the half-finished monstrosities that leered around from every side of the room. And when Pickman suddenly unveiled a huge canvas on the side away from the light, I could not for my life keep back a loud scream. The second I admitted that night, it echoed and echoed through the dim vaultings of an ancient and nitrous cellar. I had to choke back a flood of reaction that threatened to burst out as hysterical laughter. Merciful Creator. Elliot, but I don't know. I don't know how much was real and how much was a feverish fancy. It doesn't seem to me that Earth can hold a dream like that. It was a colossus, a nameless blasphemy, with glaring red eyes, and it held in bony claws a thing that had been a man, gnawing at the head as a child nibbles on a stick of candy. It positioned itself kind of a crotch. As one looked, one felt any moment it might drop its present prey and seek a juicier morsel. But damn it all, it wasn't even the fiendish subject that made it such an immortal fountain head of panic. No, not that, nor the dog face, with its pointed ears and bloodshot eyes and flat nose and drooling lips. It wasn't the scaly claws or the mold-caked body, nor the half-hooved feet. None of these, though any one of them might as well have driven an excitable man to madness. It was a technique, Elliot. A cursed and impious and unnatural technique. As I am a living being, I never else saw the actual beneath of life so fused into the canvas. The monster was there. It glared and gnawed and gnawed and gnawed and glared, and I knew that only a suspension of nature's laws could ever let a man paint such a thing without a model, without some glimpse of the netherworld, which no mortal unsouled to the fiend has ever had. Pinned with a thumbtack to a vacant part of the canvas was a piece of paper now badly curled up. Probably, I thought, a photograph from which Pickman meant to paint a background as hideous as the nightmare it is to enhance. I reached out to uncurl and look at it when suddenly I saw Pickman start, as if shot. He had been listening with peculiar intensity ever since my shocked scream, and had waked unaccosted echoes in the dark cellar, and now he seemed struck with fright, though not comparable to my own. Had it been more of the physical than spiritual, he drew a revolver and motioned me to silence, and stepped out into the main cellar and closed the door behind him. I think I was paralyzed for an instant. Imitating Pickman's listening, I fancied I heard a faint scurrying sound somewhere, and a series of squeals and bleats in a direction I couldn't determine. I thought of huge rats and shuddered. Then there came a subdued sort of clatter which somehow set me all in goose flesh. A furtive, groping kind of clatter, though I can't attempt to convey what I mean in words. It was like a heavy wood falling on stone or brick, or wood on brick. What did that make me think of? It came again, louder. There was a vibration as if the wood had fallen farther than it had fallen before. After that followed a sharp, grating noise and shouted gibberish from Pickman. The deafening discharge of all 6 chambers of a revolver fired spectacularly, as a lion tamer might fire, in the air for the effect. A muffled squeak or squawk and a thud. Then more and brick grating. A pause, the opening of a door, at which I'll confess I started violently. Pickman reappeared with a smoking gun cursing the bloated rats that infested the aged wall. That deuce knows what they eat, Thurber, he grinned. For those archaic tunnels touch graveyard and witch den and seacoast, but whatever it is, they must have ran short, for they were devilishly anxious to get out. Your yelling stirred them up, I fancy. Better to be cautious in these old places. Our rodent friends are one drawback, though I sometimes think they're a positive asset, by the way, of the atmosphere and color. Well, Elliot, that was the end of the nightmare's adventure. Pickman had promised to show me that place, and heaven knows he had done it. He led me out of the tangle of alleyways in another direction. It seems, for when we sighted a lamppost, we were in a half-familiar street with monotonous rows of mingled tenement blocks and old houses. Charter Street turned out to be. I was too flustered to notice just where we hit it. We were too late for the elevated, and we walked back downtown through Hanover Street. I remember the walk. We switched from Termount to Beacon, and Pickman left me at the corner of Joy, where I turned off, and I never spoke to him again. Why did I drop him? Don't be impatient. Wait till I ring for the coffee. We've had enough of the other stuff, but I, for one, need something. No, it wasn't the paintings I saw in that place, though I'll swear they were enough to get him ostracized in the 9/10 of homes and clubs in Boston. I guess you won't wonder why I have to steer clear of subways and cellars. It was something I found in my coat the next morning. You know, the curled up paper tack to the frightful canvas in the cellar. The thing I thought was a photograph of some scene he meant to use as a background for the monster. That last scare had me come while I was reaching to uncurl it. It seems I had vacantly crumbled it into my pocket. But here's the coffee. Take it black, Elliot, if you were wise. Yes, that paper was the reason I dropped Pickman. Richard Upton Pickman. The greatest artist I've ever known, and the foulest being that ever leaped the bounds of life into the pits of myth and madness. Elliot, old Reed was right. He wasn't strictly human. Either he was born in a strange shadow, or he'd found a way to unlock the forbidden gate. It's all the same now, for he's gone back into the fabulous darkness he loved to haunt. Here, let's get a chandelier going. Don't ask me to explain or even conjecture about what I burned. Don't ask me either what lay behind the mole-like scramblings Pickman was so keen to pass off as rats. There are secrets, you know, which might have come down from old Salem times. And Conan Mather tells even stranger things, but you know how damned lifelike Pickman's paintings were. And we all wondered how he got those faces. Well, that paper, it wasn't a photograph of any background after all. What it showed me was simply the monstrous being he was painting. on that awful canvas. It was the model he was using, and its background was merely the wall of the cellar studio in minute detail. But by God, Elliot, it was the photograph from life. Jeez. Wow, okay, well, I gave myself the creeps since it's 2 a.m. right now. Jeez, yeah, it's... So, I'm gonna have a hard time sleeping. But, yeah, apparently Pickman could mildly see the future, and he would see monsters or demons, but he would see them in the real world, and he would see them in real time, and he would paint it, and he kept it all in a secret cellar. So that's oof. Imagine that guy that sees monsters and stuff, and it turns out that he's actually seeing them in real time, and he draws them, and damn. So that was the last painting that freaked the guy out. The crumbled up picture was a picture of the thing chasing the both of them. Right before he fired the revolver, he passed it off as rats, but something was chasing them. Jesus. Okay. Well, that's the end for this video, guys. I hope you liked it, and I know it was very long, just right under an hour. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if you like the story. Once again, it's called Pickman's Model. That is Pickman's Model by H.P. Lovecraft. It was a very long story. Well, not very long, but, to tell it in one take. Jeez, I got him. That was rough. But it's one of my favorite stories. Well, from the suspense genre. Well, like always, guys, I'll try to get another video up within the week, or within 7 days or so. We'll see what happens, but let me know if you like this kind of storytelling. I'll try to find other stories or have other ideas for ASMR. And like always, let me know what you think in the comment section. And I guess I'll see you guys next time.